Hello, everyone. Thanks for making the time to join us this morning. My name is Michael. I'm the events coordinator and publicist at Annie Bloom's Books. For those of you who aren't familiar with the store, we're located in Portland, Oregon, in the heart of Multnomah Village, where we've been around for 43 years now. We're open weekdays from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and weekends from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Our website is always open. You can shop day and night at annieblooms.com. Let's admit another person. Hi, Amy. You can shop for Audrey's book with that link that I just put into the chat right there. And we are here with local author Audrey Sauble for storytime reading from her new book, Can a Rock Grow? There's going to be, let's see, you can be a little Q&A and show and tell, and you can either post questions into the chat or come on to ask them, grown-ups, kids, whoever feels like coming on there. You can also raise your little hand in the reactions menu at the bottom. Let me tell you about Can a Rock Grow? Discover flat rocks, round rocks, sharp rocks, and even hexagon-shaped rocks in Can a Rock Grow? And explore the shapes rocks make as they grow and break with this entertaining and educational picture book. The book is a simple, easy to read introduction to different types of rocks, as well as the rock cycle. The back matter includes a few key geology words, as well as a scavenger hunt. Sounds fun. This is the third book in the early science series following Can a Tree Be Blue and Can a Spider Be Fluffy? Audrey Sauble started writing children's books to answer her oldest child's questions about eggs. Now she loves exploring science and nature through stories. She's the author of several picture books and 2 activity books. Everyone, Audrey Sauble.
Hello, and thank you, Michael. I really appreciate Annie Bloom's hosting this. And I just wanted to mention, you have the link for the books. I actually dropped those books off myself and I signed them. So if you want to get a signed copy, Annie Bloom's has them. Like Michael said, we're going to be reading Can a Rock Grow? Oh, it looks like my camera is going to have a little bit of an issues picking up the text. So it's a good thing I have a share screen option. We can get started if that's a, okay, so I will bring up my PowerPoint slide.
Should be good to go on share. There you go. All right, cool.
And okay, so we're going to be reading Can a Rock Grow? And talking about rocks some, but I also wanted to show you this rock because this is a very much a normal rock. It's a gray, kind of boring rock. Like sometimes you might wonder why people are so interested in rocks, because if you look at that, that's pretty gray. That's kind of round. You might think that's kind of boring. There's a couple of interesting things about this rock though that I wanted to share before we get started on the book. The first one is, I think it has a really fun shape. If you notice, it's a bit of a heart shape. But from a scientific perspective, if you take a little bit of a closer look at this rock, you might, when it focuses, you might notice some little white specks on the rock and all those little pockmark holes on the rock. Now, these are things that a scientist would be able to look at and use to learn more about the rock and how it formed. The gray material is one type of mineral. The white material is a different kind of mineral. And the conditions that the rock was in when it formed affected how those minerals solidified into that particular texture. So we're going to be learning a little bit about that as we read the book today. So, Can a Rock Grow? Written by Audrey Sauble, and I also illustrated it. This book is to all the rock hounds everywhere and to all the family and friends who helped me with this book. So have you ever watched a rock grow? Most people haven't. We usually see rocks breaking and changing, not growing. How do rocks change? Well, can gravity change rocks? Yes, sometimes gravity pulls down huge cliffs. As the stones fall, they shatter and break. Can trees change rocks? Tiny tree roots sometimes creep into cracks in a rock. As the roots grow, they can split the rock apart. Even water can change rocks when it drips into gaps in the rock during icy weather. As the water freezes, it can split the rock into pieces. Rocks change in other ways too. Some rocks grow into tall pillars. Basalt columns often break into hexagon shapes. Other rocks grow in flat layers. Shale breaks into smooth, even layers. Mica breaks into paper-thin layers that light can shine through. Some rocks grow from a mixture of sand, gravel, and other debris. These conglomerate rocks break into ragged, lumpy masses. Other rocks grow into brittle, glassy chunks. Obsidian and flint form sharp edges as they break. What about rocks with holes? Some rocks grow holes from gas bubbles trapped inside the rock as it forms. Pumice has so many holes that it's light enough to float. Other rocks grow holes as they break. Sometimes clams dig holes in soft rocks to use as homes. Sometimes water wears holes in rocks when it drips on a rock for many years. Some rocks even grow into round shapes. Thunder eggs are round rocks that hide agates or other crystals inside. Other rocks roll through sand and waves until they become as round and smooth as an egg. Rocks can grow into other shapes too. Some rocks grow crystals shaped like cubes or bubbles or even roses. Other rocks grew as trees before they changed into fossils. All these rocks, crystals, and fossils grew ages ago. Are any new rocks still growing? Yes, many new rocks are growing deep underground where heat and pressure mold them into new shapes. But are any rocks growing where we can see them? Some rocks inside caves are growing. In these caves, water from the ceiling drips slowly down from the rocks. Each drop of water carries tiny grains of limestone to the rocks. These rocks grow so slowly that we can't see the change, but lava from volcanoes creates new rocks almost every day. If you watch a lava flow from a volcano, then you will see new rocks begin to grow. Now, I don't have the back matter, the glossary section on this slide, so I'm going to see, but these are some very simple words, basic words to describe rocks. If I get it at the right angle, I really apologize for this. But there are three main types of rocks. And I think most people have some idea what those rocks are. Does anybody want to help me out and tell me what the three main types of rocks are? Does anybody remember that or heard about that? So we can actually figure that out by going backwards through this book. Starting here at the volcano page, one of the types of rocks is igneous rocks. These are rocks, igneous is a word that means fire. So they're rocks from fire or lava, lava or magma. So there's the rocks that were on fire, and then they have cooled down to form a rock. So those are igneous rocks. They come from volcanoes when they push lava out onto the surface of the earth, or magma deep down under the earth when it starts to cool. This is a second type of rock. This is sedimentary rock. And we usually think of sedimentary rock as layers of rock that form as sediment or debris falls out of a river or out of the lake water and it forms in layers on the bottom and becomes compacted down until it hardens into rock. So that's one kind of sedimentary rock. But the limestone in caves is also a sedimentary rock because it's the little particles that are in the water, and then they absorb out of the water and harden until they become rock, like these limestone pillars in the cave. And the third main type of rock is metamorphic rock, rock that is changed from heat and pressure deep underground. So these are the three main types of rocks. There's one other one that we don't usually talk about, with a couple actually. So we'll keep going backwards. Fossils. Fossils are another type of rock. They didn't form from sediment. They didn't form from fire. They didn't form from the pressure, but they changed from living material into a rock as the minerals came in and replaced the organic material in the trees or in animal carcasses. So that's a different type of rock. That's not one of the three main types, but it is still a type of rock. And then the third, or the last one, are these crystals. So they're types of minerals. They're usually a very pure type of mineral. When you have a rock like this one, this would be a whole bunch of minerals mixed together, kind of mashed up into different compounds that cools into this kind of a rock. But when you have a pure mineral, sometimes that hardens into a specific shape, and that's where you can get these cubes and the bubbles and the roses shapes. These are all three actual types of rocks. The cubes are based on, I haven't said the word before. It's a gallite, I believe is how it's pronounced, but it has the cube shape in the minerals. And so as they grow, they form into these cubes. The green ones are based on malachite, and the rose shapes are, there's two different types of rock that can form that kind of rose. One is barite and one is gypsum. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. And at this point, I have a few rocks that I wanted to show off, and I wondered if anybody wanted to help me answer some questions about rocks. So I don't know if people want to use the chat, or if you want to have your videos on and do thumbs up or thumbs down as we ask some questions and try to identify some rocks. It seems like it might be easiest to use the chat. So I'm going to have some rocks and I'm going to show them, and I'm going to see if anybody can identify what they are based on the book. This one, I'm going to say this one's my favorite, but actually all of these are my favorite. I have lots of favorites. So we take a look at this one. Do we have any guesses? And at this point, if you want to unmute yourself and answer, or if you turn your video on and put a thumbs up if you think you know what it is. Oh, yeah, I see a couple people. It's obsidian. So this one, you can tell the glassy sheen on it, and this concave, or this sort of curve, shell-shaped curve, is a classic sign of obsidian. This is a type of volcanic glass, and as it breaks off with these kinds of curves. And if you remember the picture in the book of the knife, people can take like an antler or something that's really hard and chip off sections of this rock to create that shape for a knife or an arrow. You actually have to be very careful with this rock because it is basically glass. I got this rock at the Rice Museum, and I put it in a box with a couple of other rocks when I was bringing it home. And it bumped into the other rocks and one of the edges broke. So when I pulled it out of the box, I actually cut myself on it because I wasn't paying attention. So this is glass and you have to kind of treat it like glass. Here's another cool one. Can everybody see that? So this is a snail fossil that was formed inside of the rock, and then as the rock eroded away, part of it started to show. I have another snail fossil here. Sorry. So you can see this one isn't even in the rock anymore. And I forgot to mention, but there were, in the book, I actually hid a snail on every single page. And I figured it'd be really hard to hide a snail on the museum page until I thought about fossils. If you notice, there's a snail shell sitting right up there on the top shelf, so that there's even a snail in the museum. Okay, I said I had lots of favorites. This one is my favorite. Does anybody remember what kind of rock this is? So that's the inside of it. There's the outside of it. This one's a thunder egg. Sometimes, so there's actually two different types of, or two different kinds of geodes that you can find like this. Well, a lot more than two different. This one is a thunder egg. It's from Oregon. Someone cut it in half and polished it so that you could see the inside. A thunder egg is similar to a geode. A geode will form in a round ball like this, but it won't necessarily be filled in completely smooth like this on the inside. It might have a whole bunch of crystals like this one. Like this one could have come from the inside of a geode with the outside, and then these individual separate crystals on the inside. Does anybody recognize this one? It's a little bit hard to tell with the camera colors, but this one has just a little bit of a purple tint to it. So it's an amethyst cluster. One of the fun things about amethysts is that amethysts are actually a type of quartz. It's almost like rock families. So you have the quartz crystals that are, you might have seen the big clear kinds of crystals. And depending on the different colors in the rock, the quartz might actually be some different kinds of rocks like these amethysts. And all of that depends on what kinds of minerals or compounds were trapped inside of the crystal as it was forming. This one's a kind of a fun one. I haven't gotten somebody to identify this one. My best guess is that it is a type of jasper. It has these really cool lines formed inside of it. And then on the outside, it has this white crust. Here's another one from the book. Does anybody recognize this one? Shale's close. If I hold it up really closely, again, the lighting doesn't work as well on the video, but actually if I put it right up there, you can still see me through it because this piece is really thin. So this is a piece of mica. I picked both of these pieces up in New England. I was I was in New England a couple of years ago, and they actually had a trail in one place that it had normal rock, but mixed in with the normal rock was these large chunks of mica. I've heard that there's some areas in Oregon that have some mica like this, but it's just not nearly as common here in Oregon. There's one type of rock though that is very common in Oregon. I don't have a good chunk to show you, but we can go back to one of these pictures. Okay. Oops. Okay, I had it for a minute. I apologize about the camera. Usually I can do a different camera, but so unfortunately it's really blurry. You might be able to see the shape and remember those basalt columns. Does anybody remember seeing, driving through Eastern Oregon and noticing basalt columns? There's a lot of them out in the John Day area, especially around the John Day fossil beds. Not so much around the Painted Hills, but the Sheep Rock area. And that's because Oregon used to have some massive volcanoes, and they spread these sheets of lava across the landscape when they erupted. Massive layers of lava that cooled. And as they cooled, they became basalt, and the basalt cracked into those specific hexagonal shapes. I think that's really cool because a lot of times you might see pictures of the Giant's Causeway over in Ireland, or there's some in Iceland that are really cool as well. But we have them here in Oregon as well, and I think that's awesome. So another rock identification. This one might be a little bit tricky. From conditions for mica in New England, I believe New England has a lot more granite. Granite tends to cool slower. It tends to, I believe it, most of the time granite is cooling underground, so it cools slower, and it has a larger grain than basalt. Basalt is a very fine-grained rock, and it cools quickly, relatively quickly for volcanic rock. So it doesn't have as much time for the crystals to form. And so it's just the difference in the conditions, also the difference in what minerals are in the lava as it's cooling. So this rock, does anybody want to try and guess? This is actually a rock. It's kind of an oddly shaped rock. Does anybody want to guess what kind of rock this might be? Yeah. To give you a hint, it's a type of fossil, but it's not a type of fossil that is an animal. It is a type of fossil that came from an animal. So if you think about animals, animals have to eat. They eat to get nutrients. Looks like Rocky Road fudge. Well, it's not the food part. So they eat and they ingest the food, and then they have to poop. And sometimes the animal poop becomes a fossil. And you know, that might be a little bit gross, but it's also really helpful for, coprolite is the scientific name for fossilized animal or fossilized poop. And even though it might seem a little bit weird, these can be very valuable for scientists because sometimes they can cut these open and find out what the animal was eating. So like dinosaurs, they can open up the dinosaur coprolites. And if they find plant stems fossilized inside of that, then they can figure out that maybe the dinosaur was a vegetarian. If they find animal bones, if you think about like owl pellets, owls eat the animal and then they spit out the bones because they can't digest the bones. And so, you know, if a dinosaur poop has bones in it, then that's a pretty good sign that that dinosaur ate other animals. And they might even be able to tell what kinds of bones what kinds of bones are inside of the coprolite, and then figure out the food chain for animals that don't even exist, that we can't study anymore, just from looking at these coprolites. I've got one more here. This one's a trick question. When I've been walking on some gravel roads around my area, sometimes I will find these rocks. Well, not rocks. I'll find these shapes. And I was very puzzled about them at first because I don't see how that kind of shape could happen. And it turns out that it doesn't actually happen. These were a man-made piece. Does anybody happen to recognize these and know what they are? So I had to ask in a rock group on Facebook. And what I learned about these is that they are a porcelain material. And rock hounds will sometimes use these materials in a rock tumbler. So when someone wants to polish rocks, they'll put them in a tub with some gravel, sand, called grit. And then the tub rolls around and around and around. It polishes the rocks and smooths them just the way that a rock rolling around in the ocean, getting bumped around with all those sand particles. And so they can create that kind of tumbling sand inside of a rock tumbler. And that speeds up the process, so you don't have to wait years and years and years for a rock to get smoothed out by the ocean. And so these are one of the types of grit materials that rock hounds will put into the tumbler to help with the smoothing process. And then I guess somebody dumped them on my gravel road, and I thought that was kind of fun. So does anybody have a favorite rock? Maybe it's a one that you've had for a long time, or maybe one that we read about in the book today. So I think I mentioned that Obsidian was one of my favorites. Yeah, pumice. I don't have a bucket of water to show you guys, but this is actually a fairly large chunk of pumice that I found in Eastern Oregon. And so if I put it in water, it would float. And I think it's pretty amazing that a rock could float, because that's not something you would expect a rock to be able to do. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? Or just general comments that you want to make about rocks?
I was still wondering about the fossils. At what point is there like a specific threshold or point or whatever which something no longer is organic matter, and or is a rock organic? Anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. Is it like a tree becomes a fossil? At what point does that happen?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
It is such a it would normally be a very, very slow process. So I'm not sure. And it happens when things are buried underground a lot of times. So I'm not sure what it would take to find something in the process of fossilization.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's some in-between thing. It's like, it's almost a fossil. It's not quite a tree anymore.
Yeah. Well, this summer we went out to Eastern Oregon, and we hung out in the John Day fossil bed area. And there's a, okay, I'm going to forget the name now, Wheeler High School. actually has a fossil dig that people can go and try digging on their own. And it's mostly, it's leaf matter, plant debris. So we actually found a couple of leaves there while we were digging. But what we were told is that we have to bring them home and spray them with a, it's like an art protective spray. Because otherwise, once they're in the air, they will actually decompose and fairly quickly, even though they're fossilized, just because they're so thin and they're so fragile. So I don't know if it's even possible to dig up a like a tree trunk in the process of fossilization without it just falling apart.
Decompose. Interesting. Cool.
Yeah. I showed off one of my other. My kids have gotten a couple of those, the eggs that you dig rocks out of, kind of thing. And so this was one of the fossils that we got in one of those kits. Would be a little trilobite. I think I even have, I don't remember which box it was in. I'm not seeing it right off, but I have a very tiny ammonite as well. And those can be gorgeous because they, depending on the type of mineral that is present when they're fossilizing, they could just be kind of normal looking rocks like this, but there's, they could also have the minerals to form an opal. So it's there's fossils called opalized fossils. I've seen some for crabs, like an opalized crab.
Wow.
And so it's got all those brilliant blue colors that an opal would have in a crab.
That's really cool.
So that's what I've, those are my rocks, and I'm happy to answer more questions if people have questions or just want to talk a little bit more about geology. But otherwise, I really appreciate you guys coming. Hope you enjoyed it today.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Any further questions? We're recording this. I'll put it up on our YouTube channel later. So if you know of folks who weren't able to make it and want to share this, it's really great information and really fun and a really beautiful book. So yeah, point them to Annie Bloom's YouTube channel for that. And have a good day, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.